Welcome to Ambleside Flourish, brought to you by Ambleside Schools International, with Dr. Bill St. Cyr, Executive Director of Ambleside Schools International, hosted by Ambleside Schools of Colorado.
Currently, the average 9-year-old American spends 50 hours per week on screens. The average teenager, 70 hours a week on screens. On a 9-year-old spending 50 hours a week on screens, what's the most formative influence in that child's life? Is it parents? Is it teachers? I promise you, it's the screens. That's what's shaping the child's character. Every child is born knowing there are things worth having and things worth avoiding, but they're absolutely clueless what those are. Their affections are set first by the parents and then by the tribe. What do you desire, child? What do you want? Those desires were not random events. They were cultivated. And they were cultivated by somebody or something. And it's a function of quality time. Whoever has the most quality time with the child gets to do the most shaping of the affections. Screens have the advantage of the buzz factor, meaning they're designed to cause dopamine and adrenaline hits. That's tough competition. But parents have the heart factor, because your children really want to bond with you, really want to be with you. That's a huge pro. As long as they know you want to be with them and that you feel comfortable with them. When it comes to setting the affections, and thus the kind of child our boys, a kind of adult, our boys and girls will be at the age of 30. Who or whatever gives them the most time, most quality time, wins. It'll be you, or it'll be their friends and their screens. And generally those become the same thing, because the culture of the friends and the affections of the friends get set by the screens usually. So what's a parent to do? Be the parent. Don't be nice. Be good and be in charge. If not you, then it's Disney Corp who will be in charge. You want an interesting education? Go to the Disney Channel and say from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. one day, just watch. Just watch. And then ask yourself, is that the kind of relationships with adults, with peers, with self that you want your children to have? It's interesting. Second, limit and direct the use of technology. Absolutely no screens in bedrooms. Limit the time. Make sure there are technology-free times, fast in your home, so that we make sure we're not addicted. And watch out for the signs of addiction and withdrawal. Third, invest in positive alternatives. And the best positive alternative is you. You are the best alternative to screens. More about that in a moment. Let's talk about soft threats of technology. These are the ways technology interacts with certain cultural values and reinforces and supports them, and therefore shapes our way of being in the world. In the 7th grade history book, American history book, there's a chapter entitled "The Sun is Overthrown." The S-U-N is overthrown. You might not have known this, but until 1883, pretty much every town had its own time. Sometimes in towns, there'd be many times because every jeweler might have their own time, and people would set their watches based on their loyalty to their particular jeweler. And so, if you were in Boston, the clocks were 5 minutes ahead of New York, and if you were in Baltimore, the clocks were 5 minutes behind New York because we used something called astronomical time. So noon was set when the sun was directly above you. So time was set by nature. Or in some people's minds, God, if you wish. Because God determined when it would be noon in your particular location. Now, this created a great problem for railroads. Wasn't a problem when we were using stagecoaches, which could at best travel 5 miles a day, 5 miles an hour on a good road. But once you were traveling 40 miles an hour, you had trains going in different directions, so that you'd have to change the track at a specific time. 5 minutes it was pretty important to get everybody on the same clock, right? So, time changed. Technology changed our time. And I think it was 1883 we established standard time. So it was no longer set by nature. It was now basically set by the railroad companies. That everybody. Now, you think what a difference that made in our way of being in the world and how we relate to ourselves and others. Now, for the first time, we're on the clock. And that affects our ways of doing relationships. In the 18th century, if you set to meet someone at 1 o'clock, nobody was offended if you were 20 minutes late or 20 minutes early. Now we had a completely different subject because everybody's got watches and everybody's watches are set at the same time. So that when I'm at university and one of my younger sisters comes up to see the college campus and she calls her big brother and says, this is actually rather embarrassing. She says, hey, I'm in town, let's get together. And I pull out my day timer and I say, we can meet from 2:30 to 3:30 on Tuesday. She, of course, was rightfully indignant and offended. Well, that's actually the fallout of our change in the relationship with time based on certain technology. Because in the digital age, efficiency matters more than relationship. And that's driven by the technology and reinforced by the technology. Can you see how that might happen? In a different age, I would have said, she's come here? My afternoon's free. Let's just see what we do. But I was scheduled in my own mind every 30-minute slot. which is actually rather pathological. At least for those who believe in relationship. Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, points out that most people believe that technology is a staunch friend. There are two reasons for this. First, technology is a friend. It makes life easier, cleaner, and longer. Can anyone ask more of a friend? Second, because of its lengthy, intimate, and inevitable relationship with culture, technology does not invite a close examination of its consequences. It is the kind of friend that asks for trust and obedience, which most people are inclined to give because its gifts are truly bountiful. But of course, there is a dark side to this friend. Its gifts are not without a heavy cost. Stated in the most dramatic terms, the accusation can be made that the uncontrolled growth of humanity's technologies destroys the vital source of our humanity. It creates a culture without a moral foundation. It undermines certain mental processes and social relations that make human life worth living. Technology, in sum, is both a friend and an enemy. A new technology does not add or subtract something. It changes everything. In the year 1500, 50 years after the printing press was invented, we did not have old Europe plus the printing press. We had a different Europe. After television, the United States was not America plus the television. Television gave a new coloration to every political campaign, to every home, to every school, to every church, to every industry. We had a new America. New technologies alter the structure of our interests. That is, they determine what we think about. They alter the character of our symbols. That is, they determine what we think with. And they alter the nature of community, the arena in which thoughts develop. You know, few technologies are inherently evil. But the real challenge is the deployment of technologies as driven by certain cultural ideas, which those technologies mask and reinforce, causing us to adopt them uncritically, unthinkingly. Let me suggest two ideas that the digital age promotes and supports, which we would find rather questionable, but which are now cultural idols and ideals. Here's one idea. Fullness of life is found by doing what you want. Have it your way. And what you want is that which maximizes your pleasure and minimizes your pain. Next time you see a television commercial, any kind of commercial, maybe you're on, Amazon or something, and you see a commercial come across. Just watch this. Watch any video commercial. And notice what the implied promises are on the commercial. It's always, this is what you want, and we will give you what you want, and life will be so much easier, so much more pleasurable, and there'll be so much less discomfort. I mean, next time you see a commercial, watch if that's not what it's promising you. There is an intellectual history behind that. We think of the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 17th century and the British Bentham and Mill in the 18th century, but I don't have time to go into that. Here's the second idea. And actually, now these two in some ways are mutually exclusive and contradictory. But as you think about it, they dominate our culture and they define our use of technology. Resources are scarce and the environment is competitive. Fullness of life is found by working hard enough and smart enough to dominate your competitors. Well, that's pure Charles Darwin. That's pure Darwin. I mean, it's amazing the number of Christians I've met who would despise Darwinian evolution and kind of go to the mat for it, and yet are totally Darwinian in their approach to life. They approach life as if scarcity of resources, we're in competition, we got to be the smartest, the strongest, and work the hardest so we can beat everybody else. And by God, my children will be the winners in the competitive environment. Pure Darwinianism. But an idea that has saturated our culture. And, you know, there's not one of us in this room that's not profoundly impacted by those two ideas. And to some extent, we've all bought it because it's the air we've breathed in. And our children are going to buy it, and they're going to buy it in spades because the delivery mechanisms of those ideas are so much more potent now. Unless we're very clear in how we resist such ideas. Now, I'm not saying that all technological developments are motivated by those two. I mean, there actually is altruism. I think Johannes Salk, when he did the research that led to the polio vaccine, I mean, his goal was health. Eradicating a really destructive disease. I mean, Elon Musk is an interesting character. I mean, if you take seriously what he says, I mean, he developed Tesla not to conquer the auto market, but actually to reduce our dependency on carbon-based fuels. And he's given most of his huge numbers of his patents away. I mean, he's not playing the competition game. Not in the same way we normally think of it. Now, obviously, he's a brilliant entrepreneur. But what I am suggesting is, why does any particular technology sell today? Think of any technology that has a big market, including the Tesla, which is, I might add, a beautiful car. But why does it sell? And let me suggest to you that any technology that finds a mass market and really spreads does so precisely because it promises to increase our pleasure and decrease our discomfort, or it promises to give us a competitive edge in the battle. Not that every technology is developed for those purposes, but I would suggest to you that every technology that's propagated today massively gets propagated because it's undergirded by a commitment to one of those two values. Maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, competitive advantage over everybody else. That's what sells.
Ambleside Schools International fosters an educational renewal based upon the pedagogical insights of British educator Charlotte Mason. Serving an international community of parents, teachers, and schools, Ambleside makes a living education accessible to all. A living education empowers students to live lives rich in relationship to God, self, others, ideas, work, and creation. For additional information regarding Ambleside Schools International and training opportunities for principals, teachers, and parents, please visit our website at amblesidschools.com.